Chapter 14. KRATOM. A few key facts. KRATOM refers to the leaves of a tree that grows in Southeast Asia. It's a depressant or sedative, though it can have stimulant-like effects at low dose. It's been historically used in Southeast Asia, but recently is growing in popularity in the USA. Fresh leaves are chewed, or powder is made into tea. Onset is after around 30 minutes and can last for 4 to 6 hours. Some effects include it being stimulating at low dose, euphoria and relaxation. At higher doses, sedation and pain relief might be experienced, as well as dizziness and nausea, constipation or stomach upset. I must admit that I hadn't heard of KRATOM before I started making the Say Why to Drugs podcast, but it's probably the substance I received the most messages about, asking for an episode or for more information. KRATOM is the colloquial name for the leaves of the tropical evergreen tree Mitragyna speciosa. The tree, in the coffee family, grows in Southeast Asia. Across the region, KRATOM has been used as a herbal remedy for hundreds of years, for all sorts of ailments from diarrhea to aches and pains, from coughs to being used as a wound poultice. The bitter leaves are usually mixed with salt to prevent constipation and chewed, although dried leaves can also be steeped in hot water to make tea, often sweetened or mixed with sweeter beverages such as fizzy drinks to improve their bitter taste. In recent years, KRATOM use has grown in popularity, particularly in the USA. It's hard to get a good estimate as to how many people in the USA are using KRATOM, but a pro-KRATOM lobby group have estimated that around 5 million people are regular users in the country. It's particularly popular, according to the group, among people who are experiencing symptoms of anxiety or pain, and to a lesser extent among people trying to cut down their use of opioids. They found it is most commonly being used by white, middle-aged, employed men. Chewing KRATOM leaves is also popular in Southeast Asia among people working in manual labour occupations, similarly to how khat and coca leaves, or cocaine, are used in other regions, to provide energy and to improve mood. In the USA, KRATOM is most often available as a powdered extract, which can be dissolved into a drink or consumed along with food. What is it? KRATOM researchers broadly agree that there are 2 psychoactive compounds in KRATOM leaves, mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine. Research into these compounds is in its infancy, although growing. Both mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine seem to have pain-relieving properties. 7-hydroxymitragynine might be the compound that leads to reinforcement and potentially a risk of dependence. At present, there is no evidence that mitragynine is dependence-forming. However, there are many other alkaloids present in the leaves which might also impact on the intoxication experience. People who use KRATOM recreationally report that they do so because they like the feelings of alertness and confidence it gives, with some likening the intoxication experience to that of alcohol. What are the short-term effects? If chewing or drinking KRATOM, intoxication onset will occur around 15 to 30 minutes after consumption, and effects can last for 4 to 6 hours. At low doses, KRATOM appears to act like a stimulant, and people report feeling energized and talkative. People might also experience euphoria and relaxation. At higher doses, the effects of KRATOM appear to be more sedative and analgesic, pain-relieving. People may feel nauseous or dizzy, comparing the sensation to that of an alcohol hangover. High doses can lead to vomiting. People have reported having vivid dreams after taking KRATOM. KRATOM intoxication can cause constipation and stomach irritability. There's very little research into KRATOM. Most of the academic papers published that mention the substance are individual case studies detailing one particular person's experience, which makes it extremely difficult to make generalizations. However, there is some evidence that heavy, regular use of KRATOM can induce mild, depressive symptoms. Similarly, there's some evidence, though not a lot, that regular use can lead to dependence. Surveys of regular KRATOM users conducted in both the USA and Southeast Asia found that these individuals report no impairment of social functioning or cognitive abilities due to their use. Reasons for using were also quite varied. In the USA, people often reported using KRATOM because they were suffering from mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. Although using KRATOM to deal with withdrawal symptoms from prescription or other illicit drugs was also reported in this population, as well as for use in pain management. What are the longer-term effects? If a person stops using kratom after having previously consumed it regularly, they can report experiencing withdrawal symptoms. These can include things like sweating, nausea, restlessness, and difficulty sleeping. Some people report frequent yawning and having a runny nose. Usually these symptoms will cease by around 7 days, although again there's very little research to back up these anecdotal experiences. A couple of surveys conducted in Malaysia, where kratom use has occurred for many decades, found that regular users report withdrawal symptoms lasting between 1 and 4 days. While these can be unpleasant, they are rated by individuals, their family, and healthcare providers as being less severe than opioid withdrawal. Some reports have suggested that jaundice is a risk from regular use of kratom. Evidence has come from 2 cases reported in the academic literature. In one of these cases, the individual had also consumed a number of other substances, while in the other, the person reported using no other substances, including alcohol. However, the doses the person reported using were, according to the case study, approximately twice the usual dosage reported by others. It's impossible to draw conclusions on the risk of jaundice from just 2 cases like this. But they do suggest that it is possible that kratom might pose a risk of liver damage, particularly at extremely high doses. Similarly, there are case reports of psychosis after use of kratom. Again, without larger-scale studies, it's impossible to tell whether kratom was the cause or whether there were other underlying predictors of psychosis that the individuals had, or even whether the kratom these individuals used was adulterated with other substances. When kratom is bought as a dried leaf, it might have been sprayed or coated with another substance. Indeed, there have been a number of cases reported where substances believed to be kratom have been found to be mixed with O-desmethyltramadol, a metabolite of the opioid tramadol. And it's this mix of kratom and O-desmethyltramadol, sold as a substance called krypton, that was implicated in 9 deaths that occurred in Sweden, rather than the kratom itself. In the USA, as of 2016, there have been 30 deaths where kratom was mentioned as having been consumed by the individual, but in all of these cases, other substances had also been consumed. Experimental studies have found that giving extremely large concentrations of kratom to mice does lead to death, but at quantities around 10 times higher than the level of dose that would induce intoxication. There are also some uncertainties about the relevance of these findings to humans, as there is growing evidence that mice metabolize mitragynine differently from larger animals including dogs, monkeys, and humans. This phenomenon, called allometric scaling, occurs for some substances and may mean kratom studies in mice might be limited in how much they can tell us about effects in humans. Myths and misconceptions. Kratom is an opioid. While there's some suggestion that kratom has its effect in the brain via various types of opioid receptors, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an opioid. Ketamine, for example, has an influence on opioid receptors but wouldn't be called an opioid. The USA's Food and Drug Administration Commissioner has recently stated that he believes that kratom is an opioid, with the potential for dependence, abuse, and serious health consequences, including death. However, kratom researchers publishing in the journal Addiction disagree. They wrote a letter to the editor stating that the evidence available on kratom to date does not support this statement by the FDA commissioner, although they agree that further research is needed to understand the substance better. So it's unclear, but this is probably a myth. Does kratom have any medical uses? As yet, there's no good quality evidence that kratom has any medical benefits. Having said that, as well as the ways in which kratom is used in Southeast Asia as a herbal medicine, many people across the world report using kratom to self-medicate their attempts to withdraw from opiates such as heroin or prescription opioids. Researchers, particularly in the USA, have been suggesting in recent years that kratom could represent a method of harm reduction in the so-called opioid crisis currently occurring in the USA, given that kratom does not impact on the ability to breathe in the same way that opioids do. However, as detailed earlier, there are risks from kratom due to the potential for it to be cut with adulterants, and as yet there's little research into the impact of long-term use other than self-report questionnaires. Also, it's likely that kratom has its own withdrawal symptoms, and even if these are not as extreme as those from opioids, this should not be ignored. As well as people reporting using kratom to deal with opioid withdrawal, some individuals claim that it helps them manage symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. As yet, there's no research into this, and therefore no evidence at all to support kratom being useful for this. Many people who use kratom also report that it has pain-relieving properties, and given its potential mechanism of effect is on opioid receptors in the brain, the same as a number of other substances that relieve pain, most notably opioids themselves, this is plausible. So far, the only research to back this up comes from surveys where polysubstance users were asked about their opioid and kratom use. However, there was substantial pushback from researchers when the USA's Drug Enforcement Agency tried to reclassify kratom as a Schedule I drug, which would imply it has no medical uses, and would put it in the same category as heroin and MDMA. At present, some states in the USA have banned kratom, while others are debating doing so, which some researchers have claimed has made conducting these investigations more difficult. A number of recent research papers have discussed the potential for kratom to be employed as a harm reduction tool for opioid use, and while we are a long way from definitive evidence, this could be a promising use of the substance, worthy of further research.